Great. Thank you for doing that. Okay, and then I'll omit everybody.
Aloha.
Hi, Pete.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. Hello, everybody.
Everyone.
Great. I'll give it another minute or two, just start to omit everyone. And then I'll start recording, and Grace, you can kick us off here.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start recording and we can start, Grace.
Hello, everyone. Got it. And Cheney, if you want to open the presentation when you. Thanks. So hello, everybody. Welcome to our 20th steering committee meeting. Thank you all for being here tonight. And thanks for the members of the public for listening in. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. So just some reminders. So if you're a member of the steering committee, if you could turn on your video, if possible, just so we can kind of have a more intimate conversation with each other. And if everyone could mute whenever they're not speaking. And so we have Fernando here, and you can chat with him if you're having any technical issues. And as a reminder, I know we have folks from the public attending, but the chat and the discussion is going to be for steering committee members, just to kind of help keep us on time. And at the end, we'll have the final 10 minutes of the meeting kind of reserved to answer questions from the public. So that'll be your opportunity to speak. And you probably got a little thing about this, but the meeting is being recorded. Next slide. Thanks. And we'll just do a reminder of our ground rules. So biggest thing is kind of making room for all. So if you've already spoken, give room for other people to speak. And if you're just kind of expressing agreement, you can kind of use the thumbs up, but avoid kind of repeating what other people have said. If you're disagreeing, just kind of focus on the idea, but not the person. And you guys are great at using the hand raise function. And again, to remind you to have the video on. And next page. So here we are, as you know, we're kind of reviewing the draft of the plan before it goes out to the public as a steering committee. And we're getting close kind of to the end of this part before it goes out to the public. Next slide. And so, you guys have expressed a desire to see more details. And as you know, we've been kind of going through section by section together. We've already done mobility, quality of life, and economy. Last month, we talked about community engagement, and this month, we're talking about housing,
I like this
housing and land use. Did you? Okay. All right, and so here's kind of our agenda for this evening. So right now we're doing our opening, and then we're going to kind of go right into reviewing the draft recommendations. The main, we're going to prioritize these first two topics, and that's why we're starting with them. So we're talking about future growth and future places, as well as building heights. And then we're doing the missing middle housing, and we're doing that because usually these are kind of areas that require kind of more dialogue and discussion. And then, so we'll kind of want to allow a lot of space for that. And if we go a little over on time, that's okay. And then we are also going to, in the second half of our meeting, we're going to talk about affordable housing, and then commercial and mixed use, and then as well as policies around history and culture. And then, as I said earlier, we'll have the last 10 minutes for public comment. And then, so with that, Cheney's going to present this first part on kind of future growth, future places, and building heights. As Cheney's going through this, Kind of take notes for the members of the steering committee, take notes to yourself about if you hear any policies she's discussing that maybe you have a concern about, question about, or if you notice something about on the maps about the area of where the proposed changes are going, and you kind of have a concern about that, take a note of that, because that's kind of what we're going to focus on in the discussion. So if you can just pay attention to that, and with that, I'll hand it off to Cheney.
Thanks, Grace. Okay, hi everyone. Hi steering committee. Cheney Bostic. I'm sure you all know me by now. My area of focus is on urban design and placemaking. So I'm excited to present some of these big topics and conversation tonight. Just a reminder for staff, if you can watch and let people admit people in. I get the notification, but I won't be able to pay attention to that, and then chat as well. So just to quickly kind of give a big picture, when we say future growth, places, and height, this is really the big picture about Near Northwest as a whole, and how and where new growth should be accommodated for the next 20 to 30 years in these neighborhoods. Why is this important? Because when we talk about these policies and these map changes, they update Blueprint Denver, which is the citywide map for land use. So this plan will provide guidance for future rezonings and development proposals in the area. It also ensures that redevelopment can meet other goals in the plan. So when redevelopment happens, we can pair that redevelopment with some other common goals in the plan. In terms of accounting for new growth in the Near Northwest area, just a reminder that we are anticipating, at least our research tells us that we can anticipate about 5,000 to 6,000 households and about 6,000 to 8,000 jobs in the area in the next 20 to 30 years. So what does that look like? 5,000 to 6,000 households. So just to give you some examples of the area, looking at kind of a lower density, but still, these are still, mixed use or higher density developments. We will also talk about missing middle, but these are the areas where most of the growth will be focused. So these are larger developments. But just to give you some local examples, for example, the Centric Low-High has about 300 units. It would take about 18 of those to get to 5,000 to 6,000 units. Zia Sunnyside is another example. It's about 6 to 8 stories, 435 units. It would take about 12 and a half of those. And then the higher you go up in the higher density, for example, the under construction currently, the 26th and Alcott project in Jefferson Park is 642 units. And it would take about 8.5 of those. Each of these are about a city block. So you can kind of, just to visualize the scale of what we're talking about, that's how many of these it would take to add 5,000 to 6,000 households in the area. Jobs is a little different. It's a little more difficult to kind of project and estimate, but in terms of what that looks like, it's estimated about 375 square foot per job, or 700 square feet per job for industrial. That equates to about 2 to 3 million square feet of space. So it's a lot. However, as we all know, there's minimal commercial being built in today's market. And paired with that, dealing with the work from home and hybrid options, shifting office demand. We also have growing demand for industrial space in general. So we're trying to balance the what's realistic in terms of what new development could actually provide in terms of meeting these future jobs, and what it might look like more realistically is kind of saving the existing jobs and the infrastructure for jobs, buildings that we have today, and accommodating new jobs in them, while also we have some policies around, requiring commercial in new development in certain locations, which we'll be talking about. So when we also talk about redevelopment, in the plan, we talk about creating complete neighborhoods. And what we mean by that is that while we're trying to accommodate this anticipated growth, we're also trying to achieve and balance multiple goals, like providing active ground floors, keeping culturally relevant businesses in the area, providing enhanced streetscapes and open space, historic preservation and adaptive reuse, affordable housing, of course, and also higher design quality. So the first map here is kind of what Blueprint calls future growth. And so the map on the left is what Blueprint says about the area. The map on the right is how we are currently updating it based on the feedback and the research that we have done to date. So in the areas on the map on the right, you can see in the areas that are outlined in pink, those are the areas that are changing. In general, the growth picture for Near Northwest is taking on more of a nodal approach to growth and dispersing the areas that can accommodate growth amongst the neighborhoods rather than concentrating them in large areas. These nodes are also concentrated primarily on the major corridors at high ridership and busy transit stops. So you'll see along, for example, 38th and Federal, for example, Spear and Federal, you'll see those nodes of activity, and those are areas where we are anticipating and mapping where that future growth can be accommodated. One of the reasons that it's being dispersed is because of our, which I'll get into in a little bit, is our new direction for the northeast area of Sunnyside and how it is currently providing a lot of those important medium paying jobs in the area. And so we are trying to disperse these into more of a nodal approach around transit, and we'll get into why.
I just want to make sure, Jamie, did Cheney address your question about nodes, just rather than having kind of all the density in one spot, they're kind of spreading it throughout the neighborhoods? Because she was just asking for clarification on what nodes meant.
Yeah, is that what nodes means? What is that, an acronym or?
Oh, sorry. No, a node is basically like a small concentration rather than like what we would call a center approach, is where you see the dark green on the left map.
Yeah,
Those are larger areas. And so a node just generally means a smaller footprint, a smaller area. So the differences in the map is you can see smaller areas of green compared to the other map. So
and the pink is where you're looking at the possible development opportunities.
Yes, those are areas that have been identified as what we call centers and corridors, which is what Blueprint identifies as the primary growth areas in the city.
Perfect.
So yes, that does translate.
Okay, thank you.
So matched with that is a height map. So each of the neighborhood plans translate all of this into what does that mean in terms of how tall or how high buildings, new buildings could go. So the map on the left is the recommended heights, and everything outlined in black are areas that are different than what current zoning says. Most of them are just changing from a light gray to a dark gray. So going from 2.5 stories to 3 stories. So it's a very slight bump in height. But there are areas, especially in those map areas that you saw on the previous slide, those areas where we are trying to accommodate more growth. Those are those areas in light blue along the corridors. So those would be up to 5 stories. So in general, you know, the light gray is up to 2.5 stories, darker gray is up to 3 stories, light blue is up to 5 stories, dark blue is 8 stories, and then purple gets up to 12 stories. And so the map on the right is taking into account the expanding housing affordability policy, which allows additional increases in height if affordability goals are met. And so that's an existing citywide policy that we're just mapping on top of the recommended heights. So let's see, what else do I need to say here? We also need to be realistic about growth expectations along corridors. We know that, you know, these areas do have narrower lots. They in some areas have historic character. A lot of times they're, well, actually, not a lot of times when they're adjacent to single unit and 2 unit districts, they are considered a protected district, and that has different height impacts. So this map cannot take into account everything, like those protected districts and things, but they're just to say that we are being realistic with these corridor expectations and trying to put height where it can be accommodated.
Taney, there's a clarifying question. What does the solid black mean for height on the maps? And I don't know if it's just the lines.
It's probably just the lines coming through. If you're looking at Jefferson Park, it's mapping all of the little tiny parcels. So it might look black, but it's actually dark gray.
And Leslie, did we answer your question about hot pink? I think we did, but I just want to make sure. I think so.
Okay, so this slide kind of says, you know, about what we heard from the community and why we're going this direction. In this case, this is what we heard. We kind of asked in a couple of the previous surveys about redevelopment along major transit corridors, and there was a lot of positive feedback in that case, and in general, the community welcomes change and growth along major corridors and really sees that as an opportunity to improve them. So especially when we say major corridors, also we're talking about Federal Boulevard, 38th Avenue, and Spear Boulevard. Another reason for the direction that we're presenting tonight is that a major change from Blueprint Denver is the Sunnyside industrial area. We're proposing in this draft to change that area, specifically the area in purple in this map, back to a special district rather than a center. So rather than focusing on pushing or allowing the majority of the growth to occur in that area, we're taking a step back after talking with property owners in the community and realizing that there are about 1,000 jobs in that area that are important to the community, and with the current market not providing as much commercial as people would like, and therefore jobs, we think it's important to stabilize that area for those jobs. So that is a major difference and another reason why the maps have changed. This area, however, does support future increased residential capacity south of the industrial area. And we also heard from the community that people were more aligned with allowing growth closer to the 41st and Fox station because that's where the light rail is. That's also where a lot of those newer residential developments are occurring already. So this map tries to match kind of what's occurring on the ground, and also thinking about accommodating the ability for this area to accommodate residential growth while also protecting the industrial jobs. So next is Future Places. This is essentially a land use map where yellow kind of means primarily residential areas. Darker shades of yellow mean higher densities. The pinks and reds mean mixed use, so it could be residential and commercial. And again, those darker shades mean higher intensities. The purple areas are industrial and innovation flex. In other words, those are primary jobs. So again, you'll see kind of what Blueprint Denver says on the left versus what our draft plan map says on the right. Everything outlined in black, again, is where we're making shifts and adjustments. And I know, so just to kind of give you an overview, it does increase mixed use places and residential density along major corridors, updating the Northeast Sunnyside based on that feedback that we heard and the analysis. It matches, in some cases, we're changing the map to match what already exists, like the redeveloped areas of LoHi. And in some cases, we're downgrading locations to lower intensities to match the historic character that exists, for example, on South Federal. I'll go, because this is hard to read and this is kind of where the gist of future places is, we'll go neighborhood by neighborhood. So on each of these, again, comparing left side is Blueprint Denver and right side is what we're updating. In Chaffee Park, Federal Boulevard, we've downgraded to a local center. This is due to the limited lot size and potentially historic areas that have been identified on North Federal, as well as a lot of these lots have already redeveloped into lower density uses. I-70 and Pecos, this is also a focus area for the plan, is an expanded local center. So we're taking kind of this peach color, trying to create or allow and encourage redevelopment of that area into a walkable mixed use destination for the neighborhood, including a focus on a grocery store. And then 49th and Zuni is just an idea to allow a neighborhood node to evolve. Again, a node meaning a really small, this would be, and it may even either residential structures today, but perhaps in the future they could convert into commercial uses. But that's just an idea we wanted to float out there based on looking at a major feedback from Chaffee Park is wanting more walkable areas to go and buy goods and have dinner and have resources in your neighborhood. Sunnyside, so on the right, mainly we'll focus kind of going along Federal Boulevard. We've downgraded some areas like this very northern section, most closest to I-70. It was identified as potentially historic. It has a lot of Tudor homes, and it was identified as a community corridor, which means that it could have redeveloped into mixed use. So we're kind of downgrading that. On the flip side, we're looking at along Federal and 38th and increasing from low residential, which means single unit to unit, and upgrading that to low medium, which means it allows more diversity of residential forms. And that is because when we mapped what exists today, there are already a lot of small apartment buildings, duplex, triplex, facing those corridors in these areas. And a lot of, not a lot, there are some redevelopments that have been proposed that are more townhome forms that otherwise could not be built. 38th Avenue, kind of changing some of these areas to local corridor to allow for expanding commercial uses. A lot of these areas, particularly on the western side of 38th, on the north side, they have a lot of residential structures. And so we want to encourage retaining that character, but allowing the use to change. Whereas today it could only be a single unit house. And then finally, the industrial area, which we'll talk about, we've already talked about a lot, but basically we're trying to balance job retention as well as new growth opportunity. We've shifted the mixed use nodes in that area. So where the areas where you think about as a mixed use destination for the neighborhoods are focused at 46th and Pecos, and then closer to the station at 41st and Jason. And that's to be nearest transit and where redevelopment is already occurring.
Hey, Cheney, I want to maybe stop you for a minute. I think we had some questions just for like clarification too. Just kind of, let me go back through a couple of them. So yeah, Councilwoman Sandoval was like wanting clarification on what high medium means, and maybe some of the other kind of, in terms of how many stories does that mean? Or maybe the different like low medium designations.
Yeah. So generally the light yellow, that's your typical single unit, 2 units, so single family homes and duplexes. Low medium, you're getting more like 3 stories. So those can be small apartment buildings, townhomes, row homes, things like that. High medium and is getting even higher than that. So it's getting into more apartment buildings and multi-level structures. The heights, it's a little complicated, depends on the context that you're in. And so in most of these areas though, it's generally light yellow means 2.5 stories, up to 2.5 stories. The darker yellow, the low medium means 3 stories. And then the darker yellow closest to the station is up to 5 stories or 8 stories, depending on the context.
And then Trupti, you had a couple of questions. You had one related to the quotes.
Yeah, just the definitions.
definitions.
Yeah, at least in the online tool that we'll all use, hopefully some of the definitions are in there. You know, if for instance, a local corridor versus something else, something, you know, that just like Councilwoman Sandoval was asking about stories with those definitions. That's an easy question. Is that stuff going to be in the online tool? So we're not like, you know, going back and forth between places to figure out what is meant there?
Yes, absolutely. It's in there.
Okay.
All those definitions are provided in the steering committee draft.
Okay, wonderful. So actually, so what is pink here? Because you're mentioning some of the other colors, but there's a big move in Sunnyside to address the 44th Avenue corridor. And I did see that some of the there were some, black outline changes. What are some of the changes for the 44th Avenue corridor specifically? And I think you've heard this in comments before. If not, then make sure you hear them coming up. Folks are interested in mixed use and ground floor activation on 44th. Is that being captured in here somewhere? Maybe not in the summary, but somewhere?
Yes, it is. In terms of 44th Avenue specifically in Sunnyside, it is, these pink areas are designated a local corridor. They were in blueprint and we're not changing that. So that means essentially 2 to 3 stories, mixed use environment. We also have additional policies, which I'll talk to later, about protecting the historic aspect of those corridors, being a former streetcar corridor. So we have an idea of creating a streetcar district, for example, and celebrating the former streetcar areas. But in terms of what redevelopment can occur, it would be 2 to 3 stories. Mixed use would be required. We also have policy in there to replace existing commercial square footage, for example.
Great, thank you. I'm looking forward to the policy portion of the requirement, because we may be starting a 1-2 year project to get there. So if the recommendations are in here, that's going to be helpful for us to know that. Thank you.
Jamie,
anything else?
Jamie had a question. I'm not sure if it's something to be addressed during this meeting, but she wanted to know, how do you determine, or Jamie, did you want to speak to this?
No, that's fine. And I don't know if this is the right opportunity to talk about that, but I do think it's important I love the idea of having more accessible and walkable businesses in the neighborhood. I just want to make sure that how do we determine those businesses are also going to be useful, affordable, and applicable to the population that is originally from this neighborhood. We've had so much growth and there's a lot of fabulous businesses that have come open, but a lot of the population that lives in this community doesn't frequent those businesses or patron those businesses because they're out of reach financially, or they're just not something that anybody in this community would be excited about. So I'm just wondering what steps are being taken to ensure that the growth is applicable to everyone.
Yeah, that's a great point, Amy. Most of that will be addressed in the economy section of the plan, where we talk about businesses, jobs, commercial. So policies that really incentivize both. We're looking at, protecting existing businesses that are affordable to the neighborhood today, as well as encouraging new. And sometimes that looks like, ensuring that new development includes smaller footprints for commercial uses, so that those spaces are more affordable to those small and local businesses. But there's Brad can talk more about that, but what you're looking for will be in the economy section.
And if I just had to add one more, Cheney, was, kind of Cheney skimmed through it at the beginning, but these complete neighborhood elements we've identified. To your point, Jamie, one big thing we've heard were the culturally relevant businesses in the neighborhood. So it's identified as a priority that in those green areas, as growth occurs, we want to prioritize retaining and attracting those type of businesses in the future as well. So
Super, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Because I remember, a few years back, I used to be able to walk a few blocks for entertainment purposes, to hear a band, have a drink, have dinner. And there's a lot of businesses within walking distance of my house now, but nothing that I would really want to patronize because it's not applicable to me.
So thanks for that. But I want to let Cheney kind of get through the content, and then after
Yep.
we kind of cover the content, we'll
Thank you.
have kind of a discussion. No, thank you for your input. And so, but feel free to kind of raise your hand or put in the chat if there's something that doesn't make sense and you need clarification, but we'll be going kind of back through this and having a discussion kind of about these topics too. But I just want to make sure that we kind of can get through the content and then go back through it together. Leslie, I see your hand up. Was it a clarifying question, or if it was kind of more about the discussion? Okay.
It was a clarifying question on the map that's up right now. So it looks like on the left, the blueprint Denver shows most of the Federal Boulevard bid in hot pink and maroon. And then in the new iteration, it's hot pink and black. And I just want to clarify easily what the difference is between the maroon and the black.
Okay, so it depends on, I'm looking at a big screen, and so if it looks black, it's not. It's what we're trying to do in this map is outline, and it's a GIS. It's the way that GIS spits out the map. But Leslie, so 25th has basically been downgraded a bit from a community corridor to a local corridor, based on the redevelopment that has occurred and the realization that this area has a lot of historic context. And so and this has been a lot based on your individual feedback about the bid, but so Federal Boulevard and the areas that are outlined along Federal Boulevard, those have been downgraded based on that more of the historic architecture that exists there, and keeping, again, back to kind of keeping those places as they are and not encouraging them to redevelop by placing a higher map choice. So the area along 25th is actually a lighter pink. So it's not black.
And Tim, I see your hands up. Did you have a clarifying question? And I think you're on mute. Sorry.
just to help out with this discussion, I've taken the document that you've given us and I've enlarged it on another screen. And what I'm seeing over in Jefferson Park is those are a bunch of buildings that are new ones that are subdivided into individual units. There's a black line around every individual unit, and that's what's making it look black when it's at small scale on the screen. So if you blow it up big, Leslie, it'll make more sense.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Jim.
and that's just our computer program, the way that it spit out the map. We can make that adjustment since it's making it harder to read, to take out those black lines in the future. So, okay, to summarize and move through this, and then we'll get to the discussion. This is the last slide is, so what has changed from what Blueprint Denver says in Highland is basically everything we talked about along 38th Avenue, really trying to put more pinks in that area, knowing that people want that to be more of a commercial corridor and destination. And then let's see, Spear and Federal, we've turned into that maroon color, really seeing that as it is designated as a future regional mobility hub based on the fact that Spear Boulevard and Federal Boulevard are both identified as future high capacity corridors and could have buses coming every 10 to 15 minutes. So again, this is thinking, future when the transportation infrastructure is in place, that really could be a hub for more of a mixed use. It could also help serve the North High School, sorry. The other changes in Highland are really just mapping what exists today. Blueprint had kind of identified the area around 32nd and Tejon and along Central Street as primarily residential. We really saw those places. I mean, what's on the ground is more of a mixed use. So we've turned those into a local center and a community corridor. In Jefferson Park, we talked about those changes based on Leslie's question, really taking down a notch the area of federal bid based on the context on the ground. And then the area of Diamond Hill, this is really just mapping what existing zoning allows. So this is old Denver zoning, it allows up to 12 stories. So we turned that into a regional center just to match what's allowed today. Okay, so finally, and again, we'll get into more of the details. I know a lot of you want to jump into the details, and that's okay. You can ask those questions. We may get to it later. We can kind of start to have that discussion, but based on everything presented, kind of these big moves in terms of directing growth in more of a nodal approach and kind of around transit, protecting industrial jobs. And so how do you feel about the policies and the map locations? And we've kind of asked this in two separate questions, for you to think about the policies and then the locations. And so, do you have any concerns with the policies proposed? If so, what? And do you have any concerns with the locations of the proposed changes? And if so, what? And so we can, Grace, I'll let you lead us and follow the chat.
Yeah, and as a reminder to folks that, I know we're excited to see so many members of the public attending, but the chat, just to kind of help us keep on more on time and kind of make sure we get to all the steering committee members, we're going to focus our conversation with the steering committee. So I'll maybe go back the slide. So maybe we could first start with the idea of the nodal approach. So maybe we could go to slide 11. So we could see it a little better. Okay, so maybe first we would like your thoughts and kind of feelings about the idea of kind of taking this nodal approach instead of having kind of these larger areas, having kind of smaller ones throughout the community. Does anyone have concerns about taking this approach or feel like they disagree with this approach? Anyone from the steering committee? And you can put your hand up or you can put something in the chat. And let's see, I don't see anyone. Okay, I see Troop D and Lexi have their hands up. I'll start with Troop D. You're my first one.
Yeah, hi. Actually, my question is one that I put in chat earlier, which is, given just where we are in development and spaces where you can develop, how much of the 5,000 to 6,000 new residents will Sunnyside actually be absorbing? Because it sounds like, I mean, not sounds like from this presentation, but from what we see on the ground, that a majority of it could actually go there in between the Quig redevelopment and all of the redevelopment happening currently around light rail. So that's my first question. And then on the issue of the nodes and corridors, I think I have a second question on the nodes piece, but if you can answer that first one, which is how much of the 5,000-6,000 could happen within Sunnyside, whether you want it or not. I see you're planning to do it dispersed, but we've got the location where this is happening and it's at light rail and it's changing. So how much do you anticipate for that?
Well, it's hard to break it down by neighborhood. Our economist would say, it's hard to get into those numbers. It depends. It's not up to us. I mean, we're mapping what could be allowed, but it depends on the development proposals coming in. Troop D, for example, that's why I started out showing like Zia, for example, is a 400+ unit project. And so if that were replicated, 2 or 3 times, we're talking about, about 1,000 units that could be accommodated along that rail corridor. It's been stated before, if and when Quig Newton does go through a master planning process, typically there's about 300 units on site today, and the typical practice for DHA is to triple the density. And so that would be, another 900 or so, but that's years, down the road. They haven't even started a master plan. So I'd say Quig is a little further behind, but also the redevelopments that are being proposed and occurring, at least what we can see on the site development proposal map of Denver, some of those areas near 41st and Jason are going up as 3-story townhomes instead of, they could go higher, but they're not. They're choosing not to. So it's all based on market and developers and what goes in. But if maybe 2,000, 2,500. If I had to throw a number out there, that you could, that Sunnyside could accommodate based on it having the most really redevelopable land, because you're right.
Yeah, I thank you. And I guess my concern would be to make sure that we are looking at or identifying whatever infrastructure and other needs that area would have with that much additional housing going up that we would expect, besides even the missing middle that could happen within the core. So I just want to make sure that I think Sunnyside can, should, will be absorbing a big amount, but what does that mean for other things? Thank you.
Thanks, Troop D. And then I'm gonna check in with Lexi and then Councilwoman Sandoval.
Yeah, I just, thanks. I just had a question. I think you mentioned it or hinted at it earlier that this is obviously just suggestions that goes towards something like a rezoning proposal where it's taken into consideration. So I assume that if one of these areas is right next to single family zoning where there's just residential houses and it's being proposed to go, 12 stories or 7 stories or whatever, from what maybe it might be something much lower. I assume that those protections are still in place, like a protected district or something like that. I'm just curious how that would affect.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we tried to provide buffers. I don't think there should be any like 7 stories to like that or 12 next to single unit, 2 unit, but if there is, that those are considered single unit. So if you look at the Denver zoning map, anything with SU or TU in the district designation is considered a protected district. And it requires greater setbacks for buildings. And depending on how big, like, that's why we were saying kind of like looking at 38th and Federal, for example, it is adjacent to a protected district and we're saying it could go up to 5 stories. We looked at higher and it's not feasible because the protected district would make that null and void. So
Okay.
it's a
Thank you.
balancing act. Yep.
And Councilwoman Sandoval.
Yeah, so thank you. I guess my question is I'm not familiar with on the legend, if we're all looking at the legend, I don't know what it means for a regional center, for us to go to a regional center. So Jefferson Park, down by I-25, that has all regional centers. And in Highland, where on 38th and Bryant, where the grocery store is, that has community centers and corridors. So I guess I'm not familiar enough with Blueprint Denver to understand what these means. And I may not be the only person on this call who doesn't understand what those means, because prior to Blueprint Denver, we had areas of stability and areas of change. And so now we have all these corridors and context setting. And so I guess before I can opine on what these mean, I feel like I need a refresher on Blueprint Denver, like a 101 or a piece of paper like says, hey, what do these corridors mean? And what do these, because this map, what I see is Highland has had experienced a lot of gentrification. Jefferson Park has experienced a lot of displacement and gentrification. Our policies for protecting gentrification and displacement are only 10 units or more, and this is everything under. So I guess I'm just a little bit confused. I can't even remember what low, medium residential is. Maybe I'm the only one, but I get rezonings all the time, and I have rezoned lots of properties. I have to just go on the record and say this is a bit confusing for me, because I should have gotten a little primer on low residential, low medium residential, and what all these community centers mean. What do I understand, like value manufacturing? But maybe I'm the only one, but maybe I'm speaking up for a lot of people on this call. I have a tendency to have a pretty good idea and pulse on people. I just have to say I'm super confused. So I don't feel like I have enough information to provide an opinion on these things, because I see a lot of improvements. I see a lot of good recommendations, and I also am scared and see some unintended consequences. So that's just me trying to speak up for other people who may feel how I do.
Yeah, so thanks. It can be a lot to take in. We always hear that Blueprint is, I mean, a citywide land use discussion is a hard one to comprehend. So in the draft plan, the PDF that we provided, it does provide kind of that visual dictionary of what these mean. So definitely take a look at that and understand the context. But as I said, you know, the yellows are generally residential, the light yellow meaning lower density to the higher density being the brownish orange. And then the pinks and reds are mixed use places that would have that ground floor commercial destination. You go there to get your laundry done. You go there that's where your jobs are. That's where your restaurants are, places like that. And then the gradation in color is just that intensity. So it's depending on what, you know, zoning and context you're in. But for example, the example you gave, the regional center in Jefferson Park was changed to a regional center because the current zoning is such that the lighter color didn't really make sense because it already allows up to 12 stories. So we're kind of just matching. That would be a regional center if you were to put Blueprint definition on it.
No, thank you, Cheney. Jamie asked if she could receive a copy of the presentation, and I know we did not send those out in advance, but we usually send out, yeah, like the presentation and the recording afterwards.
It'd be helpful if we could get those in advance. I think I've asked for that a couple times. I'm a visual learner. And so I have to have these up on a separate screen because you guys go through them at lightning speed. And I need to go back and reference things. So you keep asking me to opine on things and asking my community to opine on things. And I can't, like, for everyone else, if we don't have separate monitors, it's just better. It's just the best practice if we can get them prior. So then everybody can look on them. Because I know my staff is like, I wish we had this presentation. I just messaged Sung and asked him if I had the presentation as well.
Yeah, and I apologize. I mean, we typically do provide slides in advance. I think mainly because we've been sharing the draft document. I didn't want to overwhelm folks, but in the future, we'll make sure to share both kind of in advance of the meeting.
And thanks.
Sung,
you
I
for
think
that
we're
feedback.
past the point of overwhelming people. I jest, but I'm being serious.
And I know Renee, I think, had a few comments in the related to the nodes. And I know this is a lot to take in, and hopefully when you guys have time after the meeting to kind of review the plan and look at the keys more closely, that will help as well. And I'm sure that some can be available to answer questions too as they come up if they're not kind of answered in the draft as well.
Yeah,
I volunteer him for that.
Yeah, after this too, we'll have a more in-depth review period, and once you provide your comments, we can revisit some of these maps and updates in greater detail as well. So just know that this is an initial pass, and where we need to have more conversation and more time, we can definitely do that.
And Renee just asked also, like, logistically, Cheney, if you could maybe not show the notes underneath, and maybe reduce the size of other things to make the maps look bigger. It might help people see it a little better. And then Renee had, I think, also some comments about nodes, maybe nodes that we were missing. Sorry, I'm trying to go back to your comments.
And I can discuss them.
Yeah, thanks.
Sure. So my understanding is that the nodes are really where we're planning for future growth. So there's going to be a relative increase in the amount of uses, both residential and commercial, than what exists there today. So we're channeling that growth. And I see a lot of concentration of that, from 38th South. And I think that there are potential, I think of Tejon or Pecos, I guess, north of I-70, like there's opportunity there to capture additional growth. And then the question of, is it possible to have like 2 levels of these nodes, one that's a little more regional or, in multi-neighborhood, and one that's a little bit smaller that would still be a relative increase, because there's a little bit of a discrepancy between the nodes map and the future places map, where there is going to be some smaller nodes like at 46th and Pecos. And I just think like, if you could show some of that growth coming into different places, just not maybe at the same order of magnitude as the ones that are shown now, would create a hierarchy of capturing additional growth.
Yeah, that's a great comment. We talked about that as a team, and ultimately we followed what Blueprint maps that, the green areas on the left map are the community centers and quarters. So we translated that directly to anything we had identified as community centers and quarters. So local centers and quarters don't show up. But you're right. We kind of thought the same thing, knowing that the places map, we're talking about 46 and Pecos, I-70 and Pecos, like those areas should really show up. So we'll we'll think about how to do that.
And my notes are wrong. I kept typing Tejon, but it's Pecos. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Renee. I know that we're kind of, so we're getting close to 7 here, and I know we also want to have time for the missing middle, but Sung and Cheney, are your thoughts just continue on this for another 10 minutes and before going to missing middle, or 50? I just want to make sure that I'm getting to everything, because I know that we'll probably cut the other optional topics, but want to.
Well, I think it may help, because, you know, we're starting bit, like I said, big picture, but a lot of the, you know, growth has to do with missing middle policies as well. So I'm just speaking out loud. I mean, I think it might help everyone understand a little bit better if we keep going through some of the other policies, but I'm open.
Can I suggest that we do more than one meeting on land use? I think this is maybe the most important aspect, or one that it gets a lot more attention. And having this one steering committee meeting, you know, and then it goes to the public, I don't think that's actually even enough. I mean, this is like the first time we see stuff, then we'll have the online thing. Can we talk again with what you heard from everybody with a revised plan, and before it goes to the public? I just think we blow through this stuff way too quick. Turns me off, to be honest with you. It's like, why do I bother? Because it goes so quick. It's so quick. So my suggestion would be we spend more time on these things as a committee, that I don't think we're doing today. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying about, you know, in our meeting next month, we could definitely review the comments provided and then have another follow-up discussion on all of this, so that we're all comfortable.
So I'm seeing in the comments there, like Jamie had mentioned, 50 to 52nd on federal. Was that an idea for where another node could be, Jamie? Is that what you were, or was that in relation to something else earlier? Sorry.
Yes, there's a lot of space there that I see actually from like I-70 to I-76 on Federal and Pecos. If I'm understanding what a node is, because I still feel like I'm not really clear on that, so I apologize for that.
And to define a node, would that just be like an area where we're kind of trying to put where more growth would be?
Absolutely.
Is that more?
There's a lot of undeveloped there, like that Regis Center. Between 50th and 52nd on Federal. That's a shopette that I know some businesses are thriving there, maybe one or two, but there's a ton of potential for development there, specifically for a grocery store, because we are kind of in a food desert over here. But if you go down Federal all the way to 76, there's a lot of trailer parks. I mean, it's just, there's so much opportunity between between I-70 and 76 on Federal and Pecos.
Yeah, and Jamie, let me connect you to a project that's actually happening in that surface parking lot area on the Regis campus. There is an active project and they're going through a public process right now, but I'm happy to also just share that link and project contacts with you.
Okay, thank you.
Would it be helpful to now look at the building heights map and have any feedback on that before moving to missing middle? Because I think that was somewhere we wanted to.
Tim has his hand up.
Tim.
Hey, Grace, I keep hearing the questions repeated about what does a node mean? And I think you're missing the opportunity to answer the question very simply. A node is a spot. It is generally it's an intersection of two mixed-use streets in North Denver. And you compare a node to a corridor, which is a linear strip of commercial. And so our neighborhoods are generally built around nodes of commercial activity, Zuni and 32nd, Clay and 32nd, so forth. So maybe that helps.
Oh, thanks, Tim. Does that sound right, Cheney, to what, like, how you guys are using the term?
Yes.
Yes.
Cheney, you had mentioned policy that was in the economy section. That's still past the missing middle part of the presentation?
So, economy is not being discussed today. The policies that I was referring to were discussed back in February, and so you guys have reviewed those drafts.
So, I mean, it's
Brad would have presented on that.
7:01. I think we had a break in there, so I mean, we can have a 5-minute break, Grace, and then maybe come back and resume. Does that work for everybody? Grace, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay. Well, let's resume a little past 7:05 since it's 7:02 right now then.
This morning, my lips are out in front. It's up this morning, smile with the rising sun.
Can resume in a couple minutes, or once I start to see the cameras turn back on here. Were you sharing your screen, right? Great. Okay. Great. So we'll go to our next kind of agenda item of talking about mixing middle housing. So talking about housing and growth in the context of kind of like the residential areas of the neighborhood. So before I start, I know Rebecca kind of was curious about the state bill and kind of where we stand as a city. So those of you, some of you may know that the city of Denver did come out with a public statement last week opposing the bill as it was currently written at that time. I think what was stated was that the city has pretty serious concerns about this having one size fit approach to kind of addressing housing at the statewide level. And for those that might not be super familiar with the bill, there is a kind of a state bill that's active right now and is kind of going through the legislative process. And one of the key components of that is addressing housing in the residential neighborhoods. And one of the proposals were to largely kind of upzone neighborhoods to allow for fourplexes and sixplexes in a neighborhood. And a lot of that did get dialed back. But the city did come out with a public statement just saying, they agree with the general goals and what they're trying to accomplish, but the execution of it itself, the city does not agree with. So, what the bigger question really, I think what was raised is what does it mean for our neighborhood planning process? I think for us, it's really about identifying the community's vision and priorities for these types of issues and topics. So, we shouldn't limit ourselves because of what's happening at the state level, especially when we don't know what the ultimate outcome will be, if there is an outcome. We'll know more kind of next week, but I think really through the neighborhood planning process is an opportunity to understand the community's vision and priorities for these topics. So if something does get passed in the future, we're able to put that into context with what neighbors want. So just wanted to just kind of state that because I know Rebecca mentioned that earlier in the beginning. So I'll go ahead and start here. So for the missing middle housing, I just want to start with defining what we're talking about and where these policies apply. What we've heard from community input and how it influenced the overall approach, and then going through the details of that approach itself. So for, what is missing middle housing, how we describe it at the city is that it's anything between 2 to 19 units of homes. So just homes that are smaller in scale, something in between a single unit home or single family home and a large apartment building. So the forms are generally within a similar scale and fit into the existing context of the neighborhoods so that they're not disruptive in terms of visually and also they're not always necessarily quote unquote affordable, meaning they're income restricted, but they do help provide more attainable housing. So because of how a smaller unit sizes and such, it makes them more affordable, although there can be income restricted affordable housing, and we'll talk about that. So it's intended to create more housing options for people over time. So where we're talking about these areas is what Blueprint categorizes as low residential areas. So low residential areas are mostly single and 2 unit homes in the neighborhood. There are some older forms of missing middle housing. So older forms of housing that are 2 to 19 units old, 2 to 19 units that are triplexes, older row homes kind of in the neighborhood, cottage core homes that exist, and they're mostly scattered throughout the neighborhood. So just the broad overview on the approach itself. I think we've really been hearing multiple perspectives on this topic. So we understand there's a delicate need to balance the various views between preservation, but also creating new opportunities for housing. So we've tried to create an overall approach that speaks to both of those priorities and trying to balance them in a way that we think it makes sense for the community. We also heard in our recent engagement that we need to pair these ideas with affordability requirements and just to be able to address displacement concerns that often come up for these type of conversations. And generally, we talked about in the last kind of community engagement process of how to accommodate different housing in the area, and people are generally open to different concepts of accommodating them near mixed use areas, having them closer to transit. So that was something we noticed as well. So in terms of the overall framework, to be able to, again, balance these different perspectives and thoughts, we came up with these 2 different frameworks that are mapped in the draft plan. What first one's called the preservation and anti-displacement areas. So these are areas where we want to expand missing middle housing in a neighborhood while incentivizing preservation, again, speaking to the historic preservation piece, and to speak to the displacement concerns to promote the construction of new affordable housing and wealth building opportunities for longtime residents with low to moderate incomes. And then the other part of that is also the other part of the framework that we've identified are what we're calling new missing middle housing opportunities. So again, identifying areas where newer forms of missing middle housing can be appropriate. So things that housing that's compatible in scale and design with the neighborhood characteristics and other older forms of missing middle housing that exist in the neighborhood or currently exist in the neighborhood, and then also to be able to promote smaller unit sizes for those. So we're going to quickly go through the concepts for the preservation bonus and anti-displacement priority areas. So the preservation bonus is illustrated on the map and in the photos here, but as part of our existing conditions work in phase 1, we had commissioned a few historic context studies for different neighborhoods, including Chaffee Park, Highland, and Sunnyside. Jefferson Park already has a more detailed survey report for the neighborhood, but what these studies did was they studied areas where potentially historic structures or concentrations of structures existed throughout the neighborhood, depending on its architectural or historical significance. So the policy here is to incentivize preservation would be to allow an additional dwelling unit if the existing structure is preserved. So if you are only allowed one unit today, if you preserve the existing structure, you're allowed another one. So we just have photo examples of, to illustrate that here. And then the next concept is what we're just generally calling traditional missing middle housing. Throughout the process, we've heard that these are important in terms of promoting natural affordability, providing the density needed to, have a livelier neighborhood, and also contributes to the historic character. And many of these places actually aren't allowed by current zoning today. So there are some triplexes, fourplexes, smaller apartment buildings that are in areas where the current zoning won't allow. So the current zoning might only allow up to a single unit or a 2 unit, but not what exists on the ground today. So the policy for this area is that if demolition or redevelopment of these homes happen, we would require them to provide the same number of units or ensure some of them are income restricted and provide affordable housing. And we would also prioritize incentive programs to support the ongoing preservation. And this is something we address more in our economy policies about having rehab support in exchange for affordability, and then transforming, some of these homes into cooperative housing, which allows for different ownership models to promote, again, affordability for the neighborhood.
So we had a couple questions,
yeah.
maybe I'll, so Councilwoman Sandoval wanted to know if there was any language that would promote adaptive reuse.
Yeah, we do have adaptive reuse policies. We've been mainly focusing them on our commercial areas, but curious on maybe Councilwoman Sandoval's thoughts on adaptive reuse in the context of residential areas.
If you go back a slide and you go to the bullet point one more. And so you have bullet point 1, balance multiple perspectives, needs to have a delicate balance between preservation and creating new housing options. So preservation / adaptive reuse. So you have embodied energy in a lot of these structures. So not just preservation, but calling out an incentive to adaptively reuse, because preservation can mean one thing,
Yeah.
and adaptive reuse means another.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. Anything else, Grace?
There's a
Just
question
to
about why
align with-
Sunnyside has the most preservation bonus.
Sorry, I think Cheney was trying to speak up too.
Oh,
I
As
was
what is-
just clarifying that really the definition of adaptive reuse means changing the use. So it would be changing the use from residential to something else. Whereas preservation means, keeping the existing structure and keeping it residential. So I just wanted to clarify with Councilwoman, are you meaning opening up to reusing residential structures for a commercial use, or what you were saying is just reusing structures but keeping them residential?
So I think it's both. I think it doesn't have to be a either or. I think it could be an and. I think you can look at some of these tools and keep the primary residential use and build a home. And look at some of the traditional corridors that have residential properties on them, but can't be used as commercial because it's just prohibitive. We've talked about that a lot in Sunnyside. So being able to adaptively reuse them, like these bigger houses could turn into office buildings, right? Or they can be residential. So the East Area Plan has a lot of that language in it, and I just don't see a lot of that here. So I was just wondering if we've looked at some of the recommendations in the East Area Plan or East Central. I can't remember which one it is. It's District 10.
Yes, okay, so I just want to make sure we are on the same page. We do have adaptive reuse policies and they are modeled after East Central, so you should be good.
Yeah, and then to get to Troop D's question about why does Sunnyside have the most preservation bonus? It's just mainly the way the study was done and the findings that have been reflected. So I know the Highland area has that one portion, but a large of it is because the Potter Highland is already an existing historic district. And beyond the residential areas, we also have other pockets of historically significant areas that are mostly around commercial areas, and those are depicted in other recommendations as well.
If you can, at my other question with the missing middle, is the missing middle included in the 5,000 to 6,000 growth needed in near Northwest? Are we looking at missing middle plus new high rises where they didn't exist today as a combination of we need 5,000 to 6,000? And again, I'm really curious about where this goes and where it makes sense. So is 5-6 included? Does missing middle include the 5-6 include the missing middle?
And Cheney can speak to this more, and yes, it does. And I just want to kind of emphasize again, like the 5,000 to 6,000 is a projection of where of the new housing, and of course it could be accommodated in the neighborhoods. I think what we were talking about at the beginning was where we want to channel most of that, and to say we were just kind of saying the Grail strategy is saying that 70-75% would be accommodated in those kind of green areas, and the rest would try to be dispersed throughout. So yeah, the missing middle housing conversation is definitely a big piece of that.
Yeah, but I mean, Sung, these are all projections. We're all playing with funny money here and numbers that could change between now and 30 years, right? But to the extent that we're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 in near Northwest, these 4 neighborhoods, is that inclusive of new growth and missing middle? Like a different way to think about it is, how do we tell all of our communities that we need to absorb a certain amount of growth, and think about how you want that and what that means for other things like commercial or complete neighborhoods or transportation? I'm trying to get an idea and make sure I understand that 5,000-6,000 includes missing middle. I look at Sunnyside and say, we've got 2.5, right? And then are we looking at absorbing more through missing middle? So 5,000 to 6,000 the next 20 years, if that's the number we're working with, for all of near Northwest 4 neighborhoods. That's what we need to absorb to kind of stay on track. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I know there's a bunch more questions in the chat, but maybe we'll let Sung kind of get through the presentation of the different policies, and then we can kind of go back through the chat and respond to people's questions or comments.
Sure thing. So the next one is what we're calling anti-displacement priority areas. And these are areas outlined in black, and generally areas where there are more populations that are more vulnerable to displacement, and also properties that are more susceptible to redevelopment. So again, these are kind of priority areas for housing stability, wealth building, and affordability measures. So there are a few policies tied with this area and kind of outlined more clearly in the draft plan, but generally it's an opportunity to connect residents to programs that help them stay in their place, so that we have a lot of anti-displacement recommendations that are economy section. But another part of it too is similar to the preservation bonus, where we would allow an additional unit if the structure is preserved, but ensure that these areas are paired with additional policies and programs to support wealth building for the existing residents. So that can potentially include low interest financing or subsidies to actually make this preservation bonus viable for residents of low to moderate income. So that's just an example of how it might play out. And then in addition, we'll talk about, again, new areas for missing middle housing. And in these areas, we would prioritize affordable housing construction, which may include, income restricted units that are required as part of these new missing middle housing opportunities. And so we'll move kind of to the next slide and to cover those new missing middle housing opportunity areas. So again, these newer missing middle housing options, we're proposing that they are kind of located on carriage blocks and key transit corridors. The carriage blocks I'll explain in the next slide, but these are unique lot configurations that can allow for, that can accommodate more housing, just because of how long they are and how large they are. But generally, the principles that we would promote for these new missing middle housing areas is to encourage smaller unit sizes, make sure that the design and scale is consistent with existing neighborhood characteristics in respect to height and scale, and again, to make sure that they're reflective of the older traditional missing middle housing that exists throughout the neighborhood, I think, to what Renee was saying. So these may include triplex, multiplex, and cottage courts. Below is an image actually of a cottage court home in Sunnyside, where it's currently only allowing 2 unit today. And again, with preservation in mind, these areas would exclude local historic districts, and where they overlap with the preservation bonus areas, we want to make sure that we prioritize preservation, the preservation bonus policy there. And the next slide, please. And so these are just kind of zooming into the different areas. So when we talk about these carriage blocks, again, they're kind of more unique to the near northwest area where you see that map there. The carriage blocks are typically long and narrow, have maybe alley access from 2 sides, but they have the ability to accommodate more homes on a lot. We have other images here that shows a duplex potentially on the interior of the carriage lot, and some that accommodate multiple housing forms, including a duplex and maybe even a triplex, and that's what's shown on the bottom there. Next slide. And then the other key areas are the key transit corridors. Again, these are busier streets with bus and transit corridors that provide connections to neighborhood destinations. We've heard a lot from people that are comfortable with seeing additional housing close to services and closest to transit. So these are kind of another key area to accommodate newer forms of missing middle housing.
Oh, thanks, Sung. So kind of similar to the other one, section will kind of first ask you about your concerns with the policies and then kind of ask about where we've located them. But I did kind of want to go through the comments, and because there were some questions in there first, maybe before we go into the policies. So I think there was, Renee commented that she liked the traditional missing middle, and we should consider recommending that zoning do allow them again. They aren't as big as the project shown in the beginning tonight. So maybe the focus on preserving. Jamie had a question about, is there any language stating what the new units will look like? Most of the new housing built looks nothing like other houses surrounding them. Did Sung or Jamie, did you want to speak to that?
Right, yeah, and we do have some language in the document that talks about making sure that the design, scale, and design is consistent with existing neighborhood patterns, so that we're not ending up with out of scale construction and new housing that's often complained about in the neighborhood.
Yeah, because you drive through the neighborhood and you can obviously see what is new housing and what has already been there, because you have all this traditional housing and then boom, right in the center, you have this 2-story house that looks like a transformer house, doesn't fit in the housing element at all. And so that's concerning because that's taking away from the character of the neighborhood. Also, Sung, you had showed a slide a few slides back where you showed one, it was like a cottage house. And then you said this turned into this, and it was 2 houses next to each other. And my concern is that one of those houses I can clearly see, yes, that's a Coffee Park house. That's probably a block from my house. How does that go from to that? Because this single unit dwelling is no longer affordable housing, even though it's a shack. And then next to it, you say that goes to that, which I'm looking at that second picture, and I can tell you that that is not affordable housing. So I guess I'm just confused about how we allow that to go to that.
Yeah, and I guess this was just showing how an addition could be made, not that it would always look like this. And to address specifically for Chaffee Park, we were talking about the preservation bonus here as well. So like the idea is that if you own the home here, if you preserve that existing smaller home, you're allowed to build an additional home on your lot, but making sure that the homeowners that have been in the area have access to the financing and the resources needed to be able to actually accomplish that. The focus would be on making sure that the changes we make in this area are supplemented with programs that help prioritize wealth building.
There's another question about how breaking up like an old home fits into missing middle. Breaking up a single family house into 2 or more rentals fit into all of this. This is a traditional way to keep historic house was common in neighborhoods. This is from Rebecca. Is it now considered a missing middle?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we're speaking to for the preservation bonus, Rebecca.
And then I'm just kind of trying to go through, and then I want to get kind of reach out for folks for feedback, but then Renee, I was going to read your comment, but did you want to, you had your hand up, did you just want to speak to it?
I'm just typing away because I don't want to take that much time, but I'll comment to something different. And that is that I think that ADUs are a part of missing middle, and they need a little more attention, a little articulation of how they would work in these neighborhoods. So our program builds a lot of ground floor ADUs because that's what's in demand. And a lot of what I see in the neighborhoods for this project are building ADUs above garages. And because of existing standards, you're getting super garages so that the unit on top can be a little bit bigger. And so I think there could be some exploration of what types of ADUs these neighborhoods would like to see. Because if they're ground floor and they're smaller, they're a little more affordable, and homeowners who live here could build those at a price point that's much less than a unit above a garage. And so discussing how you can make ADUs achieve some of the goals that you guys have identified and put in the plan would be important. Maybe not tonight, but at some point.
No, thank you, Renee. And so I think we'll go back to our kind of overarching question. Is there, in thinking about kind of the reasoning that Sung presented and the different policies that he presented. Did anyone have kind of concerns over, or want to add to any concerns or disagree with any of the kind of approaches to either preserving or kind of promoting more missing middle? And as a reminder, this discussion is with the steering committee, and then during the last 10 minutes of the meeting, we'll have time for public comment and public questions.
If there isn't anybody else ahead of me, let me know. Otherwise, I'll go.
Trupti, you can go ahead.
Okay, so staying on this slide, Sung, I think you talked about, the development on our transit corridors being kind of part of the bigger solution of missing middle. And I'm looking specifically in Sunnyside, and I'm looking at 44th, where we're not changing zoning to allow greater density, yet it is a streetcar and a transit corridor, and one where I think there is some community want to make that commercial. And I think one of the challenges there would be is that we may need to offer a higher density to get the commercial, to make it viable. And I think this question is one where we don't really know the answer about whether it's viable. I mean, if it was viable to only do 2 stories and make first story commercial and second story residential, and that was viable, the community would be like, win. Except, developers say 3 is not even enough. And if 3 is not enough, how will we encourage our corridors to grow the way we need them to have the 15-minute neighborhoods or walkable neighborhoods also along a transit corridor? So like, as for 44 specifically, are we missing an opportunity? Do we not have all the analysis in place to make a determination on what's best for this corridor? That's my first question. And my second question has to do with the missing middle and the context being sensitive. What I'd like to understand is, how did the city, what would we do different? How did we get it so wrong the first time that everything that we've seen built is out of context? And I understand the form base versus something else, but what are we doing? What's the exact language in the policy to get the context sensitive and not get unintended consequences, which is what we've seen over the last 10 years, which is why people keep talking about character and context still. 2 questions, slightly different. I'm more interested in the corridor one, but please.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I can address maybe the second question while it's fresh in my mind, and then Cheney can also maybe help address the first one because it relates back to a lot of that growth conversation we had initially. But for the second one, I would say, again, review the kind of specific language we have in the draft plan, but it's written in a way where the intent is focused on making sure that new builds as part of these new missing middle housing opportunities are reflective of neighborhood characteristics and also the older forms of missing middle that exist today. And I think as part of the 2010 zoning code update earlier back, these kind of new districts that we created, whether to allow row homes and have townhomes, didn't really take that intent seriously, or even considered it, because if we're talking about neighborhood scale, building up to 35 feet in height is very out of scale of what's on the ground today. So that's not what we would want to encourage in these low res areas. For the missing middle, it would be, again, making sure that the height scale is consistent with the actual characteristics that are on the ground. And then for the corridor piece, I think that's a valid question, and that's what we're trying to kind of figure out here is, in the identified streetcar nodes, a lot of them are designated as local centers. And, you know, I think a lot of them are zoned for 2 or 3 stories. I think a good portion of it is 2, another good portion of it is 3. So it's just understanding, is there an appetite or desire to even go to 5 stories in those areas? And I can let maybe Brad or Cheney again speak to the financial viability of active, you know, ground floor spaces relative to the intensity of development. I think that could be a better question for them and their kind of background. Cheney, do you have any thoughts on that in particular?
Well, I was just going back to the land use map. So Troop D, I mean, we could revisit this. We did not change from the light yellow to the low medium along 44th. And rather than map that, we're kind of depending on this missing middle policy, where it could still mean, based on the missing middle policy, that those types of housing are appropriate here because 44th is one of those transit corridors. So
And actually the missing middle, like if we do talk about missing middle and more of the light yellow flips over, that is even a bigger reason for why we would need that Main Street corridor that would mandate commercial on the first floor. But I want to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, 2 stories will not work for financially. And if that doesn't work, then how do we think about positioning this corridor to be what it should be in Sunnyside, given the growth that we think will happen? And so that I just think that, you know, not changing the zoning may be an issue, or I don't know, leaving it flexible, but I think that's the concern. And I don't understand all the, obviously, the planning aspects of why we can't do this. And we do have a group that is going to be thinking about some of those things, but I think that's something that we should think about for solidifying before this is final, because I think there is a lot of talk in the community about that corridor, and put it in perspective of the rest of the growth and then whatever research that we're missing.
Thank you, Trupti. I want to make sure I see a few other people have their hands up, and I know that we're wanting to leave time for public comment too. So I saw Tim had his hand up, and Rebecca did. I thought somebody else had their hand up, but maybe put it back down.
Yeah, my
So
hand's
Tim.
been up. I'm Sam as well, whenever you guys can get there.
Okay, Sam, the conversation is for just members of the steering committee, and then at the last 10 minutes, we'll have time for
Oh,
comments
okay.
from the public. Tim, did you want to go ahead and speak?
Yeah, thanks, Grace. So I'm interested in the missing middle housing concepts map that's back on the screen. And I guess a couple of questions. So carriage blocks, talking about hopefully changing policy so that you actually can build in the middle of the block. That's an age-old problem in Highland. But I noticed that your language says except in historic districts, and so half of your area in Highland is in a historic district. So I'm not quite sure which way you're going on that, but that needs some attention. And then I'm also curious about the key mobility corridors, and what your intentions are there in terms of what would you change along those corridors to accommodate the missing middle.
And changes as in what would be allowed, or like the specific adjustments that would need to be made, Tim, or
Yeah, I mean, are you talking about upzoning? Are you talking about
no?
demolishing historic structures in the landmark district or in the National Register district? I mean,
Right.
I'm on
right.
30 seconds, so I'm focused on that, of course.
Yeah, and I think with the preservation piece, we're trying to kind of focus that into areas of potentially historic areas, and where it's not that's not located and it's along a key mobility corridor, we're saying that additional kind of building forms would be appropriate, but we wouldn't be encouraging an upzoning to an MX district to allow townhome. We were saying that there would be additional modifications that need to be made in the zoning code to accomplish everything we've been talking about promoting better, more compatible design and scale of this new kind of housing that we're talking about.
Okay, I'll just point out that the devil's in the details, so I'll be interested to read more detail. Thanks.
And Rebecca, I saw you had your hand up. You might have put it down. Did you have a comment still or no? Nope. And Renee, I don't know if your hand's still up from earlier or if you had a new comment. Yeah. Okay. Did anyone else have comments about the policies kind of themselves or the different approaches? Or if not, we could talk about also, we just have a few minutes left, but thoughts about where the locations are of the proposed changes. Did anyone have thoughts about where kind of the preservation bonuses or where they're targeting the anti-displacement priority? Did anyone have thoughts about kind of in looking at the map where things are, where we're targeting those policy changes?
I do if no one else does.
Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
I agree with the focus on major corridors, increasing the opportunity to build more density there. I think one of the places we're losing that opportunity is around parks. That's a great place to, whether we do it through the missing middle policy or the allowance for heights, like allowing that around parks in addition to major corridors, just because it's a quality of life factor. And when you get more people being around that open space, really helps to offset some of the density. And then on the heights, I would ask us to be really cognizant of the price point break in construction. I mean, when you're building like lumber-based construction on a concrete platform, that's about 6 stories. And if you go above that, you then have to build a still framed building. And so if a zone allows 5 to 8 stories, you're probably only going to get, you shouldn't expect 8 stories. Rarely is that going to happen. And so looking at those breaking points is really important. And I wasn't sure about the difference. Are we going to have both those height maps in this plan so that you have the base height and the allowance? Is that how that is done now?
Sung, did you want to speak to that or?
Yeah, I think that is the general idea that we're going for these neighborhood plans, is to provide the base heights, but then also the potential heights that could be achieved with the now adopted affordable housing incentive.
Okay. Thanks.
And then Tim, maybe you'll close us out with one more comment and then we'll open it up for public questions. You're on mute, sorry.
You were asking, for other comments or opinions on someone was on here, the missing middle housing. I was interested to see that the anti-displacement priority areas exclude all of Highland. And maybe, I don't know if that's just a statement of facts that we've already displaced everybody that used to live in our neighborhood or what the intent is, but I found that a little baffling for what it's worth.
No, thank you,
Sad.
Tim. I don't know if we wanted to speak to that or if we just Sung if there was, or Cheney if there was a reasoning for that.
The mapping was based, it's a good point and heard, but the mapping was based on some of the previous maps due to looking at incomes and vulnerability to displacement and other indexes that are in the briefing book. And when we overlaid like 2 or 3 of those specific areas that we've outlined were all of them combined. But you know, essentially it should be a policy probably everywhere.
Mhm.
Well, I want to make sure that we give the promised public comment time. Councilwoman Sandoval, I see your hand up, but I imagine you can share your comment during that time. I imagine we'll have time for it. And I also wanted to let people know that we hear that you needed your feedback, that you need more time to digest all this information. And I know Sung, I imagine you can be available to answer questions as they come up as people are reviewing the draft. If they weren't able to kind of, you know, if as they read through they have questions. And we can kind of discuss how to approach next month's meeting in consideration of like, yeah, allowing people time to kind of process and get feedback.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah, I think we could talk about that a little bit more in the next step slide, but if we want to let public comments for those that want to speak, and then we can get to those slides.
Okay.
And
And
I
then,
think Councilwoman Sandoval, is that is that a new hand raise? Sorry. I just
So
caught that
one
now.
of the things that we've encountered in city council when we are applying, when projects are applying for low income tax credit, LIHTC projects, they are not being able to use the height incentives. So I'm nervous that I heard you a couple times talking about height incentives. We don't have a 4-story zone district. So what, to Renee's point, what she was talking about, the economics of a building, like how developers actually build, I feel this plan isn't exactly married up with actually how buildings are built. So today we had a rezoning in West Colfax that just went through a neighborhood plan that's using low income tax credits to keep affordability in West Colfax. They're rezoning to 5 stories, but they can only go 4 because CHFA won't grant them our height incentives don't work. And so I think that we have to also have this conversation to where Renee just mentioned, what's the reality of actually building and making sure that we're building to that. And then to Tim's point, I just want to say, I was disappointed to see that there was no in Highland and anti-displacement. I do believe that there's still people in there in Highland, I know them, who feel the pressures of displacement, and to have only 2 neighborhoods out of 4 neighborhoods in a neighborhood that has gentrification and displacement have those policies feels very exclusive, and it doesn't feel inclusive of like the comments that Highland has been attempting to make. And so I think there's some major revisions in this document that need to happen before it goes out to the public, because it does not feel reflective of the community members who have participated on this call. And it's very concerning as the councilwoman who represents these neighborhoods to have 2 neighborhoods out of the 4 only have those measures in them. So I had to say that before we moved forward, because I feel this, it just makes me feel, a lot of this makes me feel really nervous. I think it's really important conversations. But to Tim's point, the devil's in the details. We don't have forms that even allow us to build those traditional missing middle housing that you were looking at, the triplexes and the little 4plexes. And we're not having developers who are building condos because of construction defects. So we're not even building wealth building because nobody's building condos, because that's what the market is.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that, and this is a lot to take in. We're going to talk about regrouping and continuing this conversation because we didn't even get to the actual housing policies that apply everywhere, which does take into consideration anti-displacement. So I just want to say that this map does not mean that we are only looking at those areas for anti-displacement policies. We do have area-wide anti-displacement policies.
Thanks, Janie. And I did want to touch with, is it Samuel? You had your hand up during the meeting, just because this time is for members of the public, and I wanted to, if you wanted to speak to whatever you had your hand up for during the meeting, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot to say, of course, but mine's just a real quick question. When we were looking at those 3 models for the missing middle, just quickly, are there any policies or rules about, you know, that any additions that are built on, whether it's the preservation one or the others, any requirements or rules about the addition matching the original construction in terms of aesthetics, what it looks like? Because some of the pictures I could be really on board with, it looks great. Others of the pictures looks like kind of what somebody else was saying. I think Jamie, it's like, well, those are like two mishmash houses right together. So I think that makes a difference. So any rules about that?
No, but I think we can maybe speak to that intent a little bit better in the plan, potentially about, you know, if as part of this preservation bonus to make sure that future additions are complementary of the existing structure, so that you don't end up with this mismatch that you're describing.
Yeah, I think that's big, similar to what the Sunnyside overlay's been looking at, of just kind of preserving the character that way. I think that makes sense to have that be part of it. Thank you.
Thanks. Did any other members of the public have any comments? Otherwise, I see Jamie has her hand up. Jamie, did you have a comment?
I do. I know that Trupti has been speaking a lot about the 44th corridor, and I want to reference the Sunnyside, the Tennyson corridor, and how the whole from 38th to 46th has been totally redone. And when you drive down that street, there is no sun. There's absolutely no sun. You can drive down that street and you will never see the sun. And that is because of the height of the buildings. And so I'm concerned about if we build too high, that we're building these mini metropolises, and that is taking away from the character of our community. If you want a metropolis, move downtown. We need to be thinking about, especially 44th, on one side is the south. So if we build too high, we're going to completely block out that sun. And as somebody, I just don't think, like, we need to seriously consider the height and stay with the height. We don't want to go too high. We're going to block out that sun. It's like Tennyson. It's the ugliest street in the north side. There's no sun at all. You will never see the sun driving down that street. So I'm concerned with the height of the buildings that we're proposing, because we need to build so much so that we can accommodate so much. The more we build, the more they'll come. At some point, we need to draw the line and say, this is it. If we don't cut it off, then it's just going to keep going and going and going and going.
Thank you for your feedback, Jamie. I saw one more member of the public had a comment. I think his name's Pete on that. And then we'll do our closing slide. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Pete.
hello, I'm Pete Tavani. I am the general manager of the property at 47th and Jason. And I just wanted to let the community know that we're working on a master plan. John Gagnon, the architect who designed DIA, and we should be able to show that to you guys in a couple of weeks. We're going to be talking to Chuck at Mile High Comics and Martine at Torino Masazo first before I show you guys. But I just want to let you know it's in the process, and what we've basically done is, as I've said before, taken what everyone wants in 25 years, and we've worked backwards. And the reason why I'm sharing it with you at this time is because I'm pretty excited for what John has come up with for part of the area as a master plan. I believe the the community as a whole will really like it. So just want to let you know.
Hey, Pete, I thought we were going to have the exclusive. I thought you're going to, do this at Sunny first.
Well,
We need to talk.
I'll be able to after I talk to Chuck and Martine. Unfortunately, Chuck's wife got hurt,
Nanette,
and he
yes.
wasn't available this week. So
I was
And
only
then
kidding,
Martine,
but I'm looking forward to it.
I know, but Martine, I need to show up on Sunday before he gets busy. So,
Okay.
but you know, like
Uh,
I said, I think everyone will like what we're trying to do to rejuvenate the neighborhood, not regentrify it. And one thing that I wanted
Pete,
to
I
throw
don't
out
want to
there,
cut
just
you off, but
because,
I want to make, I'm sorry, Pete,
Okay.
I just want to make sure if people have to go, they can hear the next steps real quick. But if the people want to hang on and hear more about what Pete is telling about with this master plan, I just want to make sure people hear next steps before they maybe sign off. So Sung,
Great.
did you want to speak to that? So
Ye-
I'm sorry about that.
Right, yeah, no problem. So yeah, again, 3-week review period for Conveo. But I do want to, it seems like there's an interest potentially in an optional follow-up meeting sooner rather than later to have a follow-up discussion on this while it's fresh in our minds, and maybe give you a little bit more time to review the document as well as a presentation. So if we offer that up even before our May meeting, would folks be interested in that? Essentially, so
Are you suggesting an additional meeting ahead of our planned monthly meeting or pushing everything
potentially,
back?
yeah, potentially if we offered that up, who might be interested? If so, I just need to kind of regroup with our team and see what that might look like. But just wanted just to kind of respond to maybe some of the earlier feedback that I've been hearing about, just kind of wanting to potentially dig into this more if we feel like we want to do that before. So don't.
So it'd be after 5/16, basically, because we'll all have time to weigh in and then we're gonna regroup. You'd need another week after 5/16 to, aggregate all the things, and then we would regroup. I'm trying to figure out the timeline here.
Yeah. I'll discuss with our team and then maybe get back to the steering committee via email on this. But I think it seems like we do need a little bit more time to kind of talk about the land use section, and we haven't gotten to the housing the part as well. So we can discuss and follow up with that.
Could we get a little markup between the policy stuff that I'm hearing it was back in February to land use, and have some kind of markup that says, go back and look at this for the policy aspect? I mean, that's kind of the level of stuff that we're missing here, right? It's like we go through this one set, it's like, oh no, all that stuff's over there. We got to go back over there. Can we figure out how to integrate this stuff so as the committee, or even as community, we're able to put this stuff together and look at it at the same time to understand what is actually being proposed? Because otherwise it's in two different places and we're completely disintegrated there. So can we figure out how to do that?
Yeah, I can try to wrap my
Sorry,
head.
I think you're focused on 44th tonight. You're really like, that's what
No, I'm
keeps
not.
coming back.
I'm not. I'm talking about all the conversations where policy was and economics was what was given as it's covered there. I'm just saying every time that is actually the intersection, can we get information where the intersections are covered so we know where to look? I am focused on 44th, but I heard more of this than just 44th. So how do we do this so that it's easier for everyone to kind of keep up and connect the dots? That's what I'm missing. And I think other people maybe as well.
Yeah, we're constantly troubleshooting this issue. I mean, the plan, when it all comes together, it will connect those dots. However, we thought it was going to be way too overwhelming to present an entire draft plan at once, and we agreed to go chapter by chapter. So if you're interested in, the policy recommendations around like economy, and like that you were referencing earlier, those are provided in the economy draft that was, back in February, and I'm sure Sung can resend out those links to the draft document, but I mean, these are different chapters in the plan. They're all developed to the same level. So economy and housing is one chapter, land use and built form is another chapter. That we're discussing tonight is the land use and built form.
Yeah. And we
But
often
we
try
have to
include-
integrate those as we think about what makes sense. And I think that's where the challenge is for folks over here and not folks on your side who kind of can compartmentalize this and know what's going on. But I think, I mean, I'm a steering committee member. The community is in even a bigger cluster than I would be for understanding and connecting the dots on this. So I'm just trying to think about at least land use, very important to me. If policy is the other big chunk, I'd love to see something that integrates the two and says, go here for this and go here for this, and have both documents readily available. I will try to do that myself, but I think this is an issue.
Yeah, I'll send both those documents, and we do try to do the cross references so that where a policy or strategy from the economy section is relevant to the land use, we will reference that in there. But yeah, to Cheney's point, I'll send the documents together and keep in mind on how to better connect these kind of policy ideas, if they're not already being connected through a reference or something or a different approach. So
I think what she's saying, Sung, is it's hard to weave this all together. You all eat, sleep, breathe land use. You've all looked at this. I mean, you've had this draft multiple times. You wrote the draft. So for those of us who are digesting the draft and haven't had the opportunity to like have conversations sitting down and saying, hey, how does this work with the economic policy? It's confusing for all of us because we haven't, and though we all agreed for us to have these chapters come down all together, we don't continue to talk about this as a group to see how they all, the intersection of all of them, right? Where you probably have had those conversations with Cheney and all higher ups and Courtney and Parks and Recreation. You guys are constantly talking about how all of this can meld together so that you could get us the draft. So I think that's just what I'm hearing in the chat and what I'm hearing in through all of this and through like Jamie's and even Tim, all of it. It's just, it's a lot. And we've intentionally asked that. I'm not saying it's not on you. It's just that blueprint number is complicated and these plans are all complicated. And when we talk about policies, I think about citywide policies. We don't have any of these policies. They're recommendations from a neighborhood plan, but until we get them at the higher level policy for citywide policies, they don't get implemented. All that gets implemented are rezonings.
Okay. No, I
Thank you.
think, yeah, I get that. And okay, we'll figure out an approach to kind of help better connect the dots there. Okay. Great. Well, I think we're a little bit over time, so thank you everyone for sticking around. And I will keep everyone updated in terms of next steps. But please do kind of look at the draft document when you can and provide comments, and we'll follow up with kind of next step items on a future meeting. We also did finalize our reservation for North High for that June 22nd date we were targeting. So just keep that on your calendars, and I'll make sure to update the meeting invitations as well. So and I think that's it for today. So
Thank you, everybody.
thank you, everyone.
Ron.
Thank you.
Have a good night.